Welcome back to another episode of Coffee with Colleagues, and I'm thrilled to introduce today a buddy of mine that I work with ConferenceDirect. He's a guy I'm going to tell a quick story about in a second, one of my first memories of this gentleman. But first, let me introduce Matt Dykstra. Matt, welcome to Coffee with Colleagues.
Jeremy, it's great to be here.
Matt, you were a guy, I remember my first impression of you, buddy. We were at a presentation with one of our hotel partners, and they were honoring you being recognized for performance. Nothing unusual for you. You're an extremely high performer within our industry. But I remember they had a side photo of James Bond, and they put you with James Bond in the same slide or something like that. And they made a comment about how how it was pretty much one and the same. If you know Matt Dykstra, you know James Bond, or some kind of offhanded comment like that. And I didn't know you at the time. And I'm thinking, who's this Matt Dykstra guy? It sounds like a pretty interesting character. And then when I got to know you, I was like, yeah, that checks out. This guy could double as a James Bond over here. In his if this whole ConferenceDirect thing doesn't work out, he's got a side gig as in movies, I think. Anyway, Matt, give me a couple of seconds about what makes you tick. Who is Matt Dykstra?
Well, I think at my core, I'm a competitive person. And so what drives me every day is a healthy dose of competition, whether it's a friendly game of golf with clients or friends, or whether it's negotiating a citywide deal for my client. I haven't quite figured out if it's the fear of losing, or the hate to lose, or the enjoyment of winning that drives me the most. But given the choice, I'd say I hate to lose more. So when I get up, I like to make sure that I'm trying to win.
There's John Green writes a series of books where he studies all kinds of human interest stories, and he puts together the laws of power, the laws of success, whatever. And he talks a lot about that fear of losing, or actually having lost, as being a huge motivator to kind of pull someone to go forward. You look at Tom Brady, who was drafted like the last quarterback in the draft, and how he uses that to propel. He used it, I guess, now that he's retired, to propel his entire career. I think there's something to be said for that fear of losing. I like what you say there. But tell me, how did you get into hospitality? What was your path into hospitality? Where did you start, and how did you get to ConferenceDirect?
Well, it was a series of epiphanal moments, I guess. All started in high school with a field trip to downtown Chicago. Here's a small town guy going to the big city for one of the first times, and we were going to the Museum of Science and Industry. And after that, we had some free time. So some friends and I got on the public transportation, and we ended up, of all places, outside the entrance to the Chicago Hilton and Towers. And I don't know if you know that building, but it is an iconic building on Michigan Avenue, turn of the century, takes up a full city block. And we walked in there just to check it out. And the lobby, which is immense and gorgeous, was full of activity, full of the hustle and bustle of downtown Chicago. There was a gala going on, so people were coming in dresses and tuxedos. And there were business people coming to do business meetings, getting together. And I was enamored with the activity, with the humanity that was going on at that time. And I thought, wow, this is really an amazing experience. And this goes on every day. So fast forward to my sophomore year in college, I was actually a pre-veterinary medical student at the time, if you can believe that. And I was sitting in a lecture hall with 850 other students in chemistry 202. And I had another epiphany. I looked around the auditorium and realized that I was not one of these people. This was not for me. Nothing against them. It just, chemistry didn't excite me as much as I thought it would. So I closed my book, I put it in my backpack, and I walked out of the back of the auditorium, and I never looked back. And I went to my advisor, and I changed my major to business. And a lot of it had to do with that moment of the Hilton Chicago, standing in the lobby, and a realization of what my passion was, and that I'm a people person, and business was more my calling. And so that led to internships with Hilton Hotels Corporation. And ironically, my first internship was right there in the Hilton Chicago. And actually, that was my first job out of college, was at the Hilton Chicago, or in the Hiltons of Chicago. So it was amazing how that kind of seminal moment manifested itself later in my life. And so that got me into the hospitality end of things. And then years later, after 17 years with Hilton, living in various cities, Washington, D.C., was my last place. I had another epiphanal moment. I was opening a brand new hotel in downtown Baltimore, but living in Washington, D.C. So I was commuting 40 hours a month up and down the 95 corridor, which, you know, in and of itself was an experience. But that combined with, at that time in 2008-9, Hilton was purchased by Blackstone Equity. So immediately became a private company. All of my mentorship that was in the corporate headquarters was let go. And so my continuity plan no longer existed as far as I knew, and all the stock options went away. So as a young executive that was right on the cusp of getting to that next level and getting the stock options and all the things that come with longevity with a company went away. And that combined with the fact that all my mentorship that had been with the company for 35 years were gone. And that can happen to you in real life. And that scared me, quite honestly. And so I found myself in a position where I was too young not to do something and not to do something. And I needed to bet on a future that was more dependent on me. So essentially it was time to bet on myself. And I like that. I like those odds. And so that's what, that combination of events is what made me make that change.
So then, awesome story. And, you know, your side note, one of my better bosses I've ever had in hospitality used to tell me all the time, there is no Mr. Starwood. I was a Starwood guy most of my career. And what he meant by that was, you know, there's no one watching out for you. I mean, in this case, you actually had a Mr. Hilton. There is a Mr. Marriott. So it's not, the analogy doesn't quite translate over exactly. But the point is that at the end of the day, no one's looking out for Matt Dykstra like Matt Dykstra, right? No one's looking out for Jeremy Marquardt like Jeremy Marquardt. There's no Mr. Starwood that's going to come in with on his white horse and his night gear and rescue us. So I love the fact you took your career in your own hands. But why jump from Hilton? Why didn't you follow one of your mentors? I'm sure some who found themselves in other hotel companies. Why did you end up branching out and going off on your own and explore a model like ConferenceDirect?
You know, that's a great question. Because for me, it was a hybrid of what you're describing. And what I mean by that is, for the many may not know this, but ConferenceDirect is made up of a lot of Hilton people. And so for me, moving to ConferenceDirect, it was kind of like moving to old home week, you know, from, you know, Brian Stevens, Jerry Horan, a litany of others that had left Hilton to join us. And they'd been talking to me, frankly, for years about making that jump. And, you know, really it just came down to timing. It was never the right time to do that in my life. And, you know, when I made that call to make that jump, I felt like I was still oddly with some of my Hilton cohorts at the time. So it was a little bit easier transition for me. And, you know, another shout out to Hilton as a company, when I made that change, the head of sales for Hilton, who's a good friend of mine and was on the West Coast at the time, called me at home at like 8 o'clock at night. And we talked for an hour. And at the end of the day, he said, Matt, you know, I love ConferenceDirect. It's a great company. Fully believe in it. I have a lot of friends there. But he said, at the end of the day, if it doesn't work out for you, we'll always find a place for you. And that was the last thing that I really needed to put closure to that move and feel good about doing that and moving forward. So that was a really nice way for me to do that. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but it was more of a hybrid. I didn't really feel like I was leaving Hilton completely.
Yeah, but it's a different model. And I think people often, as I talk to people that are contemplating making the jump to this side, to being a consultant and taking their expertise on the hotel side to put to work for themselves and potential clients or existing clients, that security issue that you talk about and that fear of the unknown, right? And I think you just answered the question perfectly. Like, you know, a lot of times it's summed up in, if it doesn't work out, go back to what you're doing. No, you know, if you've got a good name for yourself, if you've got a good reputation, if you're likable and you're trustable, there's no reason why you couldn't go back and get a job in hotels if for whatever reason this model doesn't work out. And let's be honest, it doesn't work out for everybody, but for those that it does, it goes spectacularly well. I couldn't imagine my life now working for a hotel. As much as I thoroughly enjoyed my 13 years in hotels, I couldn't imagine my life working in a hotel again. It's not the for all the reasons you're kind of tapping into about the corporate shifting and changing that can go on. You know, God forbid you get a boss that, you know, you don't respect or you don't like. You know, this model provides a way for many of us who grew up in hotels to work for ourselves and to do something, to take those skills that we've learned and do it for ourselves. How has it been for you? I know obviously we talked about, I hinted at some of your top performance earlier in one of my comments, but you're always a consistent top producer within ConferenceDirect. How did you go about getting your clients, and how has the ride been for you with ConferenceDirect?
Well, it's important that I say that when I left Hilton, I did not have one client that had agreed to go with me. I had not done any outbound communication. I gave Hilton a 30 days notice in my resignation, and they held me to that. I worked all 30 days and just had an internal conflict of interest about making outbound calls while I was still working for the company. And so what I did do is I wrote down, how you go through your A list, your B list, your C list, and just hand wrote down some clients that from memory I thought could use my help. Because what was interesting about my last role with Hilton is I went from being an area guy where I was in meetings and meetings about meetings to more hands-on with customers. As you're opening a brand new hotel, you're wearing a lot more hats, you're rolling up your sleeves, you're getting in the trenches with your salespeople, and you're doing a lot more customer interaction. And what was striking to me is how many of these clients needed help, how they didn't know what they didn't know about the hotel business. And so that really was my entry point into customer acquisition, was all of those clients that I'd interacted with over the last 3 or 4 years opening a hotel that I felt could really use my help and use my services. And it was that mindset that I reached out to them. And it was a very successful approach. So that's how we got started.
Talk about that though. I think that's awesome, because many times when folks make sales calls, this is in any industry, no matter what, a lot of times what they're conveying in every call is what's in it for them, what's in it for themselves. They need to make the sale. They want to get the client. They want to book the business. You reached out and you just said a key word, I think, which is reaching out and offering help. Tell me about that approach and how it's been successful. I think that's something to key in on.
Well, that approach is first finding out if they need help, what that help would look like, and then speaking to it. And so, that really just comes to your approach about asking open-ended questions instead of telling clients what you do and how you're going to help them. I think the best approach is to start by asking the questions that are going to lead to the answers and to the things that they want to hear. We talked a lot about in the hotel business about feature dumping or feature puking, about talking about all the features and benefits of the things that you can offer. But a lot of times that falls flat if you're not speaking to your audience and talking about the aspects of what you do that are really important or resonate with that potential client. So the approach for me has always been to discover, ask open-ended questions, and then go in and talk about the features and the benefits and the value proposition that we can offer that speaks to their pain points. Because some of them don't like housing. Some of them hate to deal with registration. Some of them hate contract negotiations, but some of them like it. So if you're talking to a client about how great of a contract negotiator you are, but that's what they really love about their job, that's a non-starter. So it really just helps to talk about what the client wants to talk about. That's been my approach. More listening, less talking.
It's I think many salespeople struggle with that, myself included. I always have to remind myself that God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, and it should be double the ratio of listening than it is to talking. You talked about pain points, Matt, and I think we are in time now that's unique to our industry. We're fresh out of and still kind of on the tail end of effects of a global pandemic. Our industry was completely turned upside down in so many ways, but one of the ways I think we've been impacted the most has been, hotel staffing and the polish of some of the people that we used to work with that are no longer there, who are found other industries to go to. I can see pain points across the industry for our clients like I probably in my career I never have. What are you doing, I guess, these days? I know you're super busy. How has your work changed? How has your life changed in the pandemic, and how have you found your clients' needs adapted, and how you've helped in these areas where perhaps you might not have had the help before?
Yeah, well, the last 2 years, as I have been describing it, as I've never worked harder in my life for free. You know, that's kind of where we've been. So it's my business has been running on relationship equity. And what I mean by that is never, if you've been in the business as long as we have, we've been through a few things, right? We've seen a few things. We've seen 9/11, where people thought no one would ever fly again. We've been through the mortgage crisis, where we thought, some of these companies, some of these businesses are never going to come back, and they've come back stronger than ever. We came back flying more than ever. But this has been a unique one where our industry has been just laser focused and affected by this, where what we do, especially what I do, which is large scale citywide events, we're illegal. Never seen anything like that before and never saw that coming. And so it's really changed our mindset about how we look at events, how we look at meetings, how we go forward, how we market, how do we handle the whole housing process. Because what's interesting as we come out of this is I'm in a lot of different industries. My clients range transportation, engineering, medical, education, sports, across the gamut. And so what's been interesting is how we come out of this and the mindset and everybody's risk profile. So if I'm in a transportation scenario where most of the demographic is 50-year-olds and up, you get a lot different risk profile than the sporting groups, where it's a bunch of young, healthy athletes, or even engineers where, they haven't really been phased. I had 3 large events last fall that actualized in person, and 2 of the engineering groups, they picked up 110% of their block. And that was in October of last year.
Wow.
But my technical and my scientific group picked up 8%. So same time frame, same country, basically comparative cities, but picked up completely different. And it's really just endemic of the demographics. And so we need to be more mindful of that today than we ever have been. And so, that's been eye-opening to me. But to your point, to what I was getting at, the relationship equity piece, it has galvanized my relationships with my clients going through this. Nothing like adversity has this type of adversity has galvanized the relationships that I have.
They say that if you go to a hotel or any restaurant or any kind of service place and have a great experience, you're like 90% likely to return. If you had a negative experience that didn't get resolved, you have like a 40% chance of return. If you had a negative experience and it got resolved, that someone actually showed that they cared, your chance of repeating goes from like 90% if you were happy to something like 98% or 97%, because that person on the other end of that service transaction showed that they cared. It's a little bit of a different twist on what you're saying, but I completely agree that getting through adversity together, you have war stories to tell, you have more depth to the relationship. And I think it's a key point to note, because what happens when things go south is that people freak out, right? People suddenly start to lose their mind, and they fear for the relationships they've built. Not to be sadistic about things, but you can lean into that adversity. You can lean into the forces that are encroaching in on us, and use it to bond better with your clients, bond better with your hotel partners. Even I think sometimes if you can get through a really tough negotiation with a hotel partner, as much as they can be adversarial at times, and I've seen some of those conversations in the last 2 years as well, some of those adversarial ones. But if you can get through it together, you have a bit more to talk about that, in a stronger bond, I think, than you ever had. It's a great way to put it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would also say to that service component, when you have really bad service, you never forget it. It just stands out and in your mind. And never before that I've experienced in traveling has the art of service been lost as badly as it is now. It's lost its way. And it's, to your point about leaning in, it's never been easier to stand out.
I agree.
In a service industry, it's never been easier. All you have to do is fulfill an expectation. You don't have to exceed it to be good. And that's really sad, but it's the honest truth right now.
I think there's something to be said about integrity and really wanting to try. We all get when you're going to screw up, or for forces outside of us. There's a labor shortage. There's people that don't want to come back to work. Some of those things can be controlled by hotels, and they're refusing to do that. And I'm calling people out on that. Some of the things that really are their control, they're trying desperately to fill some of these positions. They're putting the right salaries in place, and they can't do that. you can see that earnest attempts to get there, and hotels are willing to go the extra mile to work with you and your clients, I think it means the world. You mentioned that two groups, same month, same country, relatively same cities, one picks up 110%, one picks up 8%, right? Those conversations, getting back to this point about partnering with hotels that understand, hotels that have a one size fit all response to pandemic related issues, when groups are so varied, where they're so differently impacted by these things. I've got medical groups that are impacted tremendously. They're on the front lines helping to fight this pandemic. And I've got tech guys who could care less. They want to be at this, programs, and they're doing everything. They like, similar story. One's picking up great, one's not so much. You need to get that point across to the hotels, I think, and hotels need to also understand that it's not a one size fit all kind of approach to this. And if they truly want to, just like you said, bad experiences will stick in your mind. There are hotels that it'll be a long time before I source them again, simply because the way that I can't in good conscience give my client a recommendation and go to this hotel when they treated my other client with such distaste. They weren't really nuanced in the conversation and wanted to apply a corporate response across the board to everyone without really digging into some of the details and trying to work with my clients. And I think, kind of highlighting again our importance in that conversation, trying to bridge that gap between what the hotel is saying and what the client is saying, and trying to find that middle ground. I find we're in a position where our services are more needed than ever. Do you feel the same?
I definitely do. Absolutely. Navigating the last 2 years, the conversations, a prime example of that 8% group. Before we launched housing, all the hotels in that destination said, just don't cancel, have your meeting. We'll work with you. We'll work with you. Just have your meeting. Well, okay. We launched it. We had our meeting. Didn't go as well as everybody expected. But those same hotels that said they'd work with us sent my client $1 million cancellation invoice. Okay. So that's the starting place. And then we start having those conversations that you're talking about, and we start getting more granular and start getting away from that one size fits all knee-jerk approach of sending the invoice and then start the conversation. Just not the way to do business in this environment, because to what we're talking about, clients don't forget that, and to the point now where my client is saying, Matt, I want you to, because we're coming back to that city in 2026. And they said, I want you to look at those contracts and tell me how much it'll cost me to cancel that city.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, there's long-term repercussions for short-term thinking. I think it's that penny wise and pound foolish analogy where, you're gonna make a buck this week, but you're gonna spit away, $10 in the future because you're not willing to work with us. And that not only impacts that group, but obviously you as someone who touches many groups, who has many, a lot of influence within the industry and talk to guys just like me, those stories start to spread. It's an unfortunate reality. I get where some of these hotels are coming from, but everyone needs to make money. But I'll go on a little side tangent here. From 2012, I think, up until just before the pandemic in 2018, every single year hotels projected and met record-breaking years. Every single year, year over year. As great as they did in 2015, they beat it in 16. As great as they did in 16, they beat it in 17. They had one bad year, 1.5 bad years, and now suddenly they want to make up all that revenue they lost in that 1.5 year with our groups now that are suffering equally as just as much as they are. They're suffering equally. We all share in this burden to recover. We all share in this burden to get back to a place where we have meetings in a quote unquote normal environment. And I think sometimes hotels miss the boat by expecting the clients to shoulder all that burden and to really come up with a financial, to create this financial windfall that they lost out on in the last 1.5 years. And it's a bit of an unfair approach, I think. And that's my side tangent done. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk, Matt. But I don't know, do you have any thoughts on that before we move on to another topic here?
The last thought, in fairness, I would say, look, I know it's been really hard on the hotel community as well, especially in the large platform urban central areas, where just keeping the lights on has been through, working through attrition damages, cancellation damages. To my knowledge, we've never had a true force majeure event in our industry. And this one was pretty legit. And so a lot of clients were able to just walk away from the store and throw away the keys, and left a lot of hotels hurting. And I do get that. But to, I think, the spirit of what we're talking about, there are ways to handle that. And you can handle it in a very mindful, thoughtful approach, or you can do that one size fits all that just really is off-putting to everybody in the situation. So I think it's more of a lesson in how things are handled than what's being handled.
Awesome way to reframe that. That's a great way to put it. The nuances matter, and I think the tone of the conversation and the thoughtfulness that goes behind it matters a ton. Great point. Matt, talked about your goals for your business now. Again, we're coming out of a transition. I know a lot of us are stuck in this mode, and I get the feeling you're doing the same. It's a lot of rebooking. It's a lot of making up for lost time over the last year and a half. As you transition and the pandemic starting to come to a close, what are some of the goals you have for your business, and how do you see yourself over the next year, shifting and growing, I guess?
The goal, in a word, for me is growth, and increased volume. Because what I'm seeing and what we've kind of touched on is you've got to do more volume and throw more against the wall, so more sticks, because right now less is sticking. And what I mean by that is, where a convention that would pull 25,000 room nights is now picking up half that. And so all the work has been done, but what's falling out on the bottom line isn't materializing. The margins are thinner. So my strategy is account acquisition, both with new accounts, throwing more room nights on the books, but so vertical marketing through my existing accounts. In other words, gaining market share. We all have accounts that do more meetings than we actually handle a lot of times, or at least I do. Large DC-based associations where I may just handle the annual, but they have a lot of regional, a lot of board meetings, a lot of things like that, where we can, sell vertically through that account. And so that's my two-prong approach in a nutshell: is more volume. That's the only way to keep the top line where it needs to be.
I like what you're saying about the vertical growth there too. I think there's opportunities right in our backyard that we haven't had to tap into perhaps before, or we just haven't thought to tap into before. And it's just as simple as asking for a referral or trying to get a little bit deeper into your clients to understand what more business is there.
And that's the key, Jeremy. I mean, make the ask.
Yeah.
I think we've been through enough together as client and consultant relationship that we should be able to ask, and we should be able to say, hey, now that we've gotten through this, who can you refer me to? Who do you know that could maybe benefit from a partnership like we have? And, a lot of times, you don't really think about it, but I don't think they think about that. I think they're so entrenched in day-to-day operations that, they're not thinking about how could I benefit? How could I have a colleague of mine benefit from a partnership with ConferenceDirect? It's just not something that they think about when they wake up in the morning. And I think it's incumbent on us to put that thought in their mind. And for some people, it's hard to make that ask, but I think after what we've been through, I think it's a very appropriate question.
I mean, think of what we do when we buy something on Amazon, right? We go to I'll never buy anything on Amazon or any other site like that without going to check the comments or the reviews and people, are people satisfied or not? If you've got satisfied clients, just might take that one review that's positive about your business and, put it in the ear of someone else who needs your services. And that one referral, that one review can do wonders to open up new relationships. So that's encouraging to hear. So transitioning out of work, Matt, it's been, I think, a year kind of mental health focus. We had just a session 2 days ago, I think, within our ConferenceDirect programming here, where we focused on a lot of mental health issues. Tell me what you've done in the last 2 years to not give up, to keep strong. I think, people look to you, Matt, as a bit of a titan in our industry, someone who is, super top performing, always there. But, let's be honest, no matter how well we perform and how successful we've been, we have our days and we have our moments. And I think particularly within the last 2 years, I'd be interested to hear, what have you done to kind of stay on your game? And I know we've had some private conversations about some of the things you've done, but I'd love for you to share, what you did in your personal life to really stay focused and maybe retool some of your personal practices.
Another great question. Focus on myself from a mental and physical standpoint. I feel that a healthy body promotes a healthy mind and vice versa. So I started to focus a lot more on personal health. I was working out in my gym as soon as it reopened with a mask on. You know, as unpleasant as that was, I felt it was important to power through that. Changed my diet. Researched. We were talking about this a little bit earlier. I'm on the protein smoothie kick, so some meal replacement therapy. In our business, it's really easy to get calories.
No
It's
doubt.
really easy to find and have them, especially when you're on the road. So, really getting back to a focus on a healthy body, healthy workout regimen, healthy. I even got a juicer for
Nice.
Christmas. So I started juicing. I used to laugh at those commercials, when they would come on, but hey, stuff's pretty good and
Yeah.
it's good for you. And so what that does is it translates into more energy, more stamina. I can put more time in the office. And when I'm in the office, I'm much more mentally focused because again, my body is energized. My mind is energized, shed some extra pounds that were on there probably early in the pandemic that I'm sure we've all dealt with. But it's worth doing that. So that has been my approach from a healthy mind, healthy body. Also worked on my golf game a lot.
Nice.
A lot of, and instead of getting in that cart, I'd walk. So, you walk 18 holes, you're carrying your clubs. You're also, having a good mental release. It's a good getaway. It's 4 hours away from the phone, the texts, the emails, the conference calls, the Zoom calls, and just good time with your friends. So it's afforded a balance and exercise at the same time.
Awesome. I think it's Richard Branson who I think said that his secret weapon is exercise, that he's remained in the game for as long as he has because he takes, I don't know, 30, 40 minutes a day just to make sure he gets some physical activity in. And there's definitely something to be said. I can almost analyze when I've had my peaks of performance and when they're low from a work standpoint. I can almost do a direct correlation to my intensity in my workouts and how I'm staying, more true to a healthier diet. It almost is a direct correlation. So when I find myself kind of slipping, I say, "Oh, wait a minute. When's the last time you worked out?" And I get in the gym, and almost instantly you start to pick up a little bit of, a little bit of extra energy, like you said. But one thing I'll also say, and this leads to my next question: when I get to the gym, I love to put on a podcast. I'm heavy into Audible books. I love that stuff. What books, podcast, reading, movies, series, whatever? What do you do to keep yourself entertained that also kind of keeps yourself sharp?
Well, when I work out, it's all high energy music. So I need that intensity. I need that kind of thing to keep me motivated there. I can't be listening to someone talk to me while I'm doing squats or something like that. It doesn't quite gel for me. But what has worked for me in staying sharp and kind of goes back to the question you asked before about staying in the game professionally, I never stopped traveling. So through this whole thing, I've spent in the last 12 months, I've spent 5 weeks in Las Vegas.
Wow.
And when you think about that, I mean, think about MPI, Connect, our annual partner meeting, PCMA, and I had a client event or a client convention that, by the way, picked up very well last fall in Las Vegas. So I never stopped traveling. I've always been committed to the craft. I believe in the school of life. And so I've been staying active in our industry, going to these events, supporting these events, and being in person, kind of pressing that flesh with my clients. And so that's been the most rewarding thing for me as a professional part of what I do, is just that commitment to doing what I do. It's really hard to promote travel and not be willing to travel.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that there's something to be said for just getting out and experiencing something different. And you take that to your client. You take your experience you're having and the things I actually point to one experience just not too long ago where I uncovered a hotel for one of my clients who was looking for it. I already had an RFP out and I was at an event. I had a conversation with somebody. They turned me on to another hotel. It ended up being the perfect fit. It was off my radar. They put it on my radar. I found the perfect fit, but that's kind of a direct translation for what you're talking about, being out and in the industry, promoting what we're talking about and what we make our living by, leads to new opportunities. And I think it's a great way to kind of practice what we preach. Just like you said, it keeps you sharp. So Matt, take us home. Give us some wisdom thoughts, parting thoughts. What would you like to tell anyone listening to this? Words of encouragement, words of wisdom. You have the last word.
Two things. That have come into focus for me through pandemic are being more mindful. I think taking a mindful approach to what we're doing in the industry, taking the time to not just, it's really easy to stay in your lane, keep your head down, take a very myopic approach to what you're doing. But I think through this, it's been more important than ever to get out of your lane and get into other people's lanes and figure out what's making them tick and where their pain points are, and what's going on in their world to add the value that you need to the experience and to the consultative process that we do. So it's been a focus for me to be more mindful. And we touched on it earlier, do more listening than talking. Be the listener. I think it was Benjamin Franklin that said, better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt, right? And so I've found it very important to be an active listener and then be more mindful in my approach with my clients. And so I think if we can all kind of deploy that holistically with our accounts, we're going to add that value intrinsically through that process.
Well, Matt, I am glad that you took the time to talk and not to listen today, because I'm sure that whoever's listening to this and taking your advice is going to come away with a lot of great ideas. Matt, you're a guy I admire a lot. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're super busy this time, and even carving out this little hour here that we're taking to have the conversation took some doing. So I'm very grateful for that. Thank you for taking the time, and I'm sure that anyone listening into this will feel the same way. You're a gem of a guy, and I really appreciate you. So thanks for taking time on Coffee with Colleagues, Matt.
Absolutely, Jeremy. I think the world of you. Thanks for doing what you do, and I look forward to seeing you at the next event. All right,
Sounds
be
good,
well,
buddy.
be safe.
Sounds good. Take care.